Now that you done kicked them spiritual shoes off, let's get straight into it. Welcome. I am Cursed Prince, and I am here to deliver the update version 1.0 for the One operating system. If you believe you are the one operating the system, this update is for you. So, you are a quantum machine capable of infinite computations. The difference is every computation generates heat, and heat requires a method of dissipation. If there is no satisfactory cooling system set in place, then you begin to get into the malfunctions and ultimately, which leads to overheating. Now, when you begin to understand that every human being is androgynous in the sense that each contains the energy signature of a masculine and a feminine. Now, these can be seen as two separate entities with two separate personalities. And these two separate personalities can either work in harmony with each other or they can be in disharmony with each other. If there is disharmony between the masculine and feminine polarities, there will be an abnormal amount of internal heat, which must be dissipated through some external method. Now, this can be manifested in the form of illness, disease, sickness. This can also be manifested in the form of creating situations in the physical realm that would essentially cultivate an environment for that release to happen. And this can be good or bad depending on what a person's intentions are and what the end goal is. If you typically ask someone where they are going in life and you truly begin to dig in, I would say on average about 3 to 4 times after you ask why, there will be a lack of depth or a lack of understanding that there truly is no end, but through the training and the human conditioning, most people will believe that there is this finality in which they can truly just step into a realm where there is no repercussions, but in every realm, in every dimension, there are repercussions, and repercussions can be seen as the resonance. Now, resonance can either be something that is harmonic or it can be something that is disharmonic. And if something is in harmony, if, for instance, two guitars are tuned at the exact same frequency and one string is plucked, the other string across the room or the other guitar across the room would also begin to vibrate, to resonate, because they are at the same frequency. They are at the same tuning. So this would lend the same concept with humans. When you are at the same vibration as someone, when you appreciate someone's baseline state of emotions or state of being, you begin to befriend them because you appreciate qualities that you may not see or be as aware of within yourself. And so this projection becomes your reality. So your friends become an extension of you. This is why The saying goes, show me who your friends are, and I'll show you who you are. This is simply because when you look at it, we manifest everything within our reality. Nothing within our world exists unless we believe it can exist. Without that belief, without that intention, there can be no existence. So if we are to believe that we are these simple one-dimensional creatures, this would then limit our ability to comprehend and to access higher realms of intelligence, higher realms of light codes. So if you begin to understand that there is a prime archetype and a mirror archetype, and these two archetypes are based on a relationship of a master and slave, a subservient relationship that has to pit one side against the other, that has to get the 51% versus the 50. And this ties back to the child versus adult, the God versus mortal, victim versus savior. If you subscribe to the victim mentality, then you are giving your power away. You are giving your energy away, your inner chi away to a invisible boogeyman that you created, that you manifested through concentrated negative thoughts. And whether this took the face of a physical person within your reality, or if it is just truly within your mind, it creates a blockage. And this blockage does not allow for smooth shifting between expressing and receiving, which is the difference between the masculine and the feminine polarities. The masculine would be seen as expressing, whereas the feminine would be seen as receiving. If a person, by definition, is unable to receive, there is a blockage within that feminine sector, within that feminine polarity. If a person is unable to express, unable to set boundaries, then they are lacking in their masculine polarity. And if there is any lack within these polarities, there cannot be a smooth shifting between receiving and giving, between knowing when to receive and knowing when to give. If either one of the polarities can be detrimental when a person is staying within a single polarity, when they simply want to receive, when they simply want everything given without going out, without expressing their desires, without truly expressing their self-image, their authentic self-image, then there has to be this flip, this masculine, this expression of desire. There has to be this outburst, this pouring out of consciousness that would make the surrounding environment aware, because there already is the auric system, which allows people just to get a feel for what a person has going on, what a person is projecting, what a person is allowing to orbit around them. Because similar to the Earth on a global scale, the more satellites that go up, the more space debris, the more trash that begins to compile in space, the more complex it will become to calculate trajectories, to make sure that things are being avoided so that a catastrophic failure is not set in motion. And this is very similar to a person with a shaky network, with a network of unreliable people. If you have a network of unreliable people, that is like having debris in your orbit. And at any time, you can get hit with stray debris. And this can take one of your satellites out. This can do major damage, can cause a war. It can cause all kind of things because it ties back to the fundamental process of switching between expressing your desire and receiving, and knowing when to tap into that infinite wisdom, knowing when to release, and knowing when to let go of expectations so that you can foster in new experiences and new expectations. So mirrors, by definition, are virtually perfect imitators of the observer's own bodily face, since mirror feedback is instantaneous in time. If the mirror is flat and without visible imperfections, then the reflected image is completely coherent in space with respect to the original visual stimulus. So, in addition to these perceptual and spatial characteristics, mirrors are perfect imitators of facial emotions and expressions, since they presumably produce unconscious mimicry and emotional contingent within the subject itself by gazing at its own reflected image. In turn, the unconscious mimicry can presumably produce empathetic resonance and emotional contingent within the subject. What this means is that when you are looking at a mirror, you will begin to see yourself in a different light because it is a near perfect projection of yourself, your emotions. So in a sense, everything becomes amplified. So if you are gazing at a mirror sad, you are amplifying the sadness because you are repeating it back to you. You are sending out those waves, and the waves are being reflected near instantaneous, and you are observing this as the consciousness, and you are beginning to create a separation between the consciousness and the body. And this is what occurs with mirror gazing, and why most people begin to report different types of phenomenon occurring with seeing faces, seeing relatives, seeing all types of different elements that essentially come from the unconscious, the subconscious. And this subconscious radar is consistently transmitting. When we look at, just switch this here. When we look at human processing, we have essentially the higher self, we have the mind, and then we have the body. So going back to the self acts as the oscillator. The self, the consciousness, is the one differentiating and near instantaneously switching between the masculine and feminine polarities. So these switching generates heat. The more efficient someone is at switching these polarities, the more easier it is to run more quantum computations. So now if you look at a person who is successful within this reality, that is a person, a quantum computer who has computed more and who has devoted the sheer raw power, the memory, the RAM, to solving these equations. And what are the equations? The equations is trauma. Each individual is given a equation, a set of trauma to solve. And once you solve your trauma, once you release your trauma, you release your victimhood. Once you release your victimhood, you step into your godhood. You step into your God mindset. You step into your integration with your highest self and your highest potential. And with that, you are tapped in to pure love. There is no more fear, because humans only operate only out of fear or love. Those are the only two fundamental reasons humans do anything, whether it be fear of judgment, fear of lack, fear of love, or whether it be for the love of money, whether it be for the love of whatever. Everything is based on two fundamental emotions, love or fear. And when you look at everything from the standpoint of love and fear, you begin to understand why people do the things they do in self-preservance. There are only so many opportunities to show yourself that love and to offer yourself that preserving hand, lending yourself that opportunity to actually grow through an experience. And when you begin to understand, the higher self, aka the soul, acts as a radar. And so this is what's receiving and transmitting the vibrational based light codes and converting them into thoughts. Now, these thoughts can then be converted into actions. Actions is a code that is recognized by the body and can be executed by the body. So this constant switching is the key to momentum. So if we look similar to an internal combustion engine, the ignition and the combustion of the fuel occurs within the engine itself. The engine then partially converts the energy from the combustion to work. The engine consists of a fixed cylinder and a moving piston. Again, think of the fixed cylinder as the cylinder that holds the polarities, masculine on one end and feminine on the other end. And then think of the moving piston as the self, the oscillator, the one that is moving up and down, because that is what life is. It is this constant up and down momentum. If you look at a snake or any type of, like a tadpole, for instance, they move using what is called lateral undulation. And lateral undulation is essentially a way to move forward by moving side to side on a fixed axis. So similar to how a snake moves forward by moving side to side, this is how one would move throughout space. So if you go all the way back to the original creation, where the universe was just a dot, just a realization of I, or I am that I am, then you would have to understand there was this calculation of time, trajectory. Everything had to become increasingly more complex as the consciousness began to trace and identify its origins so that it could move forward, so that it could gain momentum. But there was only an ability to gain momentum through the ability to switch between polarities, between the charge and no charge, no charge, the one, the zero, the one, the zero, the binary, the sequence that allowed the consciousness to evolve and to become what we know as today as the polarities. And the more efficient someone is at switching between this, and what do I mean by how efficient someone is at switching these polarities. There are certain traumas that will stop a person from receiving help. There are certain traumas that will stop a person from asking for help. And these traumas, everything essentially ties back to traumas because these are the unique chemical equations that we have all been given to solve and to unlock our truest abilities, our truest self, our superpowers in essence, because once we can unlock the trauma and use the energy that was using to depress that trauma, to hold that down, once that is released, that energy can now be used elsewhere. And so we can then concentrate our efforts on the new reality we want to create, the one separate from the powerless victim, and one where we are the singular anomaly operating within our own universe at our own speed and our own set of rules and regulations. We have to understand that with higher consciousness comes a level of accountability and a level of sincerity that gets increasingly difficult to combat if one is not honest with themselves, if one is not foundationally stable within themselves, then there cannot be an ascension of consciousness because consciousness becomes heat, it becomes light. The more you absorb, the more heat you retain. And the more heat you retain, you can only withstand so much in a certain body, in a certain vessel. Therefore, you would have to then switch vessels. You would have to adapt and fully optimize your ship to take on that amount of heat. If one is not capable of taking this heat, then you cannot run these quantum computations. You cannot quantum leap. You cannot do anything because you have to fundamentally solve and equalize the internal chaos before you can attempt to do anything else. If you try to take any shortcuts, you will only get kicked back to the beginning of the course because there will consistently be triggers, and these triggers will trigger internal waves, internal chaos. And this internal chaos can be detrimental if you are not a skilled sailor. Rather, if you are not tapped into your heart chakra, the Jesus archetype, and if you are not walking on water, if you are not walking on top of emotions, you should be able to not be affected by emotions. That's not to say not have emotions, but you should be able to regulate and, in essence, walk on water. You become above the emotions. Therefore, Jesus was above the emotions. He could make a decision, an emotional decision, with logic also applied. There's this 50-50 coherence of logic and emotion that leads to a perfect decision every single time. The problem is that most are not ready to release. And releasing is a very painful process, similar to the way a buck sheds his antlers over a season, over the course of a season, how he grows them, how they grow with this velvet, this soft exterior as they're growing. And this velvet fur is pumping nutrients into this rack. And it's making it nice and strong. And then as it matures, the velvet begins to fall off. And the buck begins to peel this velvet off. and underneath is a beautiful rack. And this is his crown, his symbol of ascension, of being tapped into the higher realms and being tapped into the larger universe at scale. And similar to us in the sense of when we go through a full chakra activation from crown to root, we go through a series of electrical charges that can be detrimental if the wiring is not in place to take on that charge. If you are bringing a power center online for the first time, there has to be a level of caution and a level of care, of self-care, understanding that these are systems that have been offline for centuries and are beginning to come back online due to a peaceful environment in which now art can be cultivated, the ingenuity can be cultivated, the magic can be cultivated, because the fundamental survival process has been established. And now it is about establishing the spiritual process so that there is a separation and a choice on whether one returns to this realm or whether one continues to evolve into the afterlife and transform into whatever comes next. With the prime, you have a archetype that is based upon the master archetype, the developer archetype, the archetype that does not ask for permission, essentially, because it is the highest level of permissions. A developer can edit the code directly. It doesn't need permission to edit the code. However, a user relies on the developer for the update. This is the fundamental difference. With anyone who is subscribed to the one operating system, you, by definition, are the operator, the developer. You are the one who is running and creating patches on the fly for the bugs that appear within your reality, for the imperfections that are less than the world that you see yourself living in and truly being happy in. Because if you are unhappy, this is a result of your desires, which if you fundamentally change your desires either by environment or via mindset, then you can tap into your authentic self, which will feel right. You'll know where you're supposed to be because it'll just feel right. You'll know when you're supposed to be there because it'll just feel right. I always say you have to be careful with the word have, because people get attached to things way too easily. And when you say have, it implies the need to do something. And when you truly understand the God mindset on the highest level, there would be no desire for anything, because perfection, by definition, doesn't need anything. It's perfect. If it is imperfect, it needs a little something. So if you are adopting the God mindset and integrating with the God mindset, then you have to understand that there is, in essence, a part of you that is perfect, but lacks the cultivation due to the human conditioning that has been set up centuries in advance before you arrived. Now, once you get hip to the conditioning, there becomes a choice on whether you want to fundamentally change the programming or whether you want to run the legal OS, the legal operating system. That is what by default every human or every being operates on this realm. So if you are switching operating systems, you would be creating something that is tailored to you. You would be recognizing that, for instance, you have a 6-core CPU and you can utilize that 6-core CPU much more effectively with software that is tailored for the hardware, similar to the integration between Apple and their software and hardware versus Android and the generic or the overall software of Google. And the difference being that when you have so many different devices and one generic software, you don't have an ability to optimize hardware. So you have to overcompensate with hardware because the software isn't able to compensate. But as you start to see these technological advances begin to unravel, pay special attention to how much of it is computational. Computational photography is becoming a huge thing, and the iPhones are the best display of computational photography. The advancements that have been made within these few years and the years to come will be monumental and have been monumental. And this comes from a fundamental understanding that software and hardware has to be optimized. Without a level of optimization, there cannot be efficiency. Efficiency does not live where there is not harmony. And if the hardware and software are not talking to each other perfectly, if they are not knowing the full capabilities and operating environment necessary to maximize potential, then there is so much being left on the table. And this can be seen even with Apple's M1 chip. This M1 chip is something that is a technological advance, and it's a technological advance because it is tapping into that software and hardware optimization. When you get into that, you just cannot be beat. And everybody is beginning to see this. Everybody is beginning to come around to this. Everybody is beginning to overwhelmingly understand that things work better when they are optimized for it. And when things are optimized for it, there are less issues because you have a specific set of tools that is for your specific adventure, your specific mission. Each soul contains a map. However, if you do not have your soul, if you are missing pieces, you are missing pieces of your map. You are not knowing where you're going. And so if you don't know where you're fundamentally going, you're lost in space. You're floating throughout time and you're interacting with these other sub-universes. However, you may be getting pulled in to their universes, and you may be or begin to orbit around their universes, and you may become space debris in their universe. You may become that trash in that person's universe. And this is why you have to fundamentally look at everyone in your life as an actor. Everyone is here to read you lines to further your self-discovery. Now, all these actors, some will be better than others. Some will have more of an impact on you than others. And this is just due to the aging process of souls and how they are advanced thousands of years in the making. and how this wisdom is cultivated and downloaded over a lifetime. These are the things that occur when we sleep. Our memories uploaded to the moon, reflected back. All these things that create this harmonious cycle of memory and light codes being exchanged. But this all generates heat. The biggest star, the sun, the one the world revolves around, generates the most heat, the most light codes. Think about this from an archetype standpoint. If you are the sun in somebody's life, you are the one generating the heat, generating the light codes, generating the information that is assisting in that being coming to terms with who they truly are, not the person who they've been conditioned to believe they are. And trauma lies at the core of the release. Trauma is the button that sets everything in motion. The second one begins to tap into this and release everything until there is no desire for revenge, for hurting others, for inflicting pain, for any type of external action, until there is an understanding that true peace can only come from within. And no matter what you do externally, if you do not give yourself peace internally, you will suffer internally and externally in chaos, because that is the cultivation and the culmination of everything you have been manifesting subconsciously and consciously due to your awareness or lack of awareness. Each man is responsible for enlightening himself. I can only take you to the water. I cannot force you to drink it. If you fundamentally understand that in order to take accountability, you have to first admit that you are not a victim. You are a person in power who has the authority to choose whether or not they do anything besides exist. Because fundamentally existing, you are already priceless. So if you are already priceless existing, that would then mean that anything you do derivative of infinity or infinite would be a compromise, because you already have been established as priceless if you carry that soul. So if you carry that soul and have been established as priceless, why do you settle for a few dollars an hour for your time? Why would you settle for people disrespecting your time, treating you as though you are just space debris orbiting within their reality, instead of the satellite who is providing them with the guidance? This is the fundamental difference in perception and how people are viewed in other people's lives, how actors are viewed, how people play certain roles and want you to adopt certain roles. However, there has to be an acceptance, a belief. Without that acceptance or belief, there won't be any movie occurring, because the set will not be set up. The environment will not be there to cultivate and to capture that scene, to capture that essence, the essence of those two universes coming together and those chemicals mixing and creating whatever chemical storm or emotional storm that does. whether that be fire with fire, whether that be fire with water, fire with air. There can be only so many elemental reactions when you understand the 4 elements, 5 elements: earth, water, spirit, fire, and air. You understand that the combination, the subtraction, the addition of these elements creates different reactions, different chemical reactions. Now, if you are assessing a situation and you are seeing a sense of overwhelming fire, of overwhelming passion, in your mind, would it make sense to fan that fire, fan that negative passion with more fire, or meet it with water and meet that, match that, neutralize that chemical reaction versus amplify? It's the difference in making something lighter versus adding density. It's easy to make something more dense. It's easy to add more density to something, to see the negative downsides, right? But to make it lighter is the more complex of the two, and the one that is more appreciated when done well. And when you can adopt and master the ability to fundamentally switch between polarities and understand what elemental element is needed in order to equalize or neutralize rather a situation, then you can step through any portal and you will have nothing to worry about, because you will not only have the armor of God, but you will be armed with the sword, the word of God, the sword of God, and you will have advanced tech. And what I mean by advanced tech is you will be running a optimized operating system that is tailored to your individual needs and knows your hardware's capabilities and limitations, yet maximizes the efficiency and limits the power and heat consumption. This is the next level of integration. When you accept the higher self, God, the archetype of the Most High, whatever you want to call it or put a title on it, it all equates to the same thing. Something that is higher than yourself, that answers the totality of the universe. And when you understand that God is love, if you are tapped into love, you are tapped into God. If you are tapped into fear, you are not tapped into God. Anything that brings you confusion is typically demonic if there is no solution attached. If something comes with confirmation, signs, and things that feel internally are resonating, are setting sectors off within you that haven't been set off in a while, then you understand that's the difference between true information. We need truth, but truth does not need us. This is the difference between the understanding of the God mindset and the mortal mindset. The mortal is limited by this body, by this prison. The God understands that the consciousness is boundless. Spirit is boundless. There are no limits. Even as we speak, we are operating within different bodies, within different realms, within different dimensions, in different spaces and time, all occurring simultaneously. The past, the present, and the future all at once converged onto this singular point called now, where you have the choice to choose whether you live out your will, which is real power, or whether you accept what has been given, what has been prescribed for you. If you are the main character in this RPG, in this role-playing game, would you rather not write your own script rather than have the choices given to you and your story simply be insignificant because it lacked originality? Or would you rather do something original, something not new, but something that feels so good? People forget it's not new and hone in on the last time they felt that way themselves, the last time they were able to tap into that level of self-mastery and balance. But this comes with release of desire, release of worldly chase. Because as long as you chase it, it will run. The second you stop chasing it, the second it comes to you. It's about switching the polarities and tapping in to the receiving end when it's time to receive. When you've done the work and you've expressed yourself and you've put in the foundation, it's time to then receive the fruits of your labor and not worry about the details. Because again, your spirit is infinite and it is in so many places that you can't even begin to understand. Putting your name into people's ears in high places, in places that will unfold at a later date, and that will all cultivate your story, your mystery, my story, the mystery. It is all a mystery. His story is history. Her story is history. Everything goes back to where we come from. And we come from darkness and love. This is the womb. The womb is a place of darkness and love. There are no attachments in this womb. There are no things that shouldn't be within the womb. There's just the naked soul, the naked pure soul, growing and evolving within a container, an environment, which is the exact same thing on a macro scale, with humans acting as blood cells living within this being. Everything is part of the dream sequence. The dream sequence is what was initiated long before you or I was ever even a conception, before our individual characteristics were carved out and cultivated over lifetimes. There existed the beginning, the womb, darkness and love. which is where we must all return. So this has been the Algorithm version 1.0. I'm Curse Prince. Till the next one.